Peach, is there anything else you want to say? No? Okay. Great.
Say the thing about favorite mentor again.
Yeah, you wanna,
I can say more fluffy stuff if you want.
that would be awesome. And then, I didn't know, are you guys recording also? Oh, awesome. Okay, good. I'm glad we're doing that. Okay. All right, like Peach said, hi, I'm Pete Giordano. And I really do love working with young companies and startups. I'm spending all of my time doing that now, actually. So yeah, just a little bit about me. One of the things I talk about with everybody is that whenever you're getting advice, always understand the lens through which the advice is being given to you. And when someone says something, as if it's kind of like a principle, like in physics, that just happens all the time, challenge them on that. And ask, what were the experiences that you had that gives you that understanding or opinion, right? So wanted to leave you with that. So do that with me, right? Because I have a certain opinion on things. So I have had the fortune of working in a bunch of different companies throughout my career. And throughout my career, the steel thread has always been starting new businesses. Whether I was doing it in startups or I was building businesses within large companies, it's always been that thread of entrepreneurship. And the other side of that is throughout my entire career, I've literally held every job in a software company. The only one I haven't held was like a quota-carrying field sales rep. But I've done everything in and around field sales, and some of them are my best friends, and so I feel like I maybe learned something from osmosis. And so part of my perspective on this is kind of this systems thinking that I have, not just about being an expert in any one area, but understanding how companies work together, how all these gears fit, and when you make decisions in one area, how it affects other areas of your business. And you'll see that a recurring theme here. And so today I am full-time working for myself, but advising startups that are part of portfolios of these companies. I do a lot of work with accelerators. So kind of on the left is my paid work and on the right is my volunteer work. And everything I do is really focused on this idea of go-to-market acceleration. Okay? And so throughout my career, I keep looking for different frameworks that I can add to my perspective and really synthesize things into just ways of thinking when I work with startups and building new businesses. And so there's a few lessons that I wanted to kind of start off with, which is, this is really important. Maybe you've heard this, like fall in love with the problem and not your solution. We're tech companies and we love to care for the baby that we created, but the reality is that you're an entrepreneur, and part of being an entrepreneur is solving a real problem and building a business around it. Those two are the real key points there. So be flexible about what your solution and product are going to be. But to that extent, you want to have a North Star. And this is this guiding light for you to follow. And kind of the second part of this sentence is really be flexible about how you're going to get there and realize that you'll have to change directions here and there, right? You hear this often. Another way to think about North Star is a vision. And the way I think of vision is it's in the future, if you're successful, what change have you created in the world, right? How does the world work now or differently in the future than it does today, right? What will be different? And lastly, and this is really important and the theme will carry through this presentation, you really have to know what you actually have under your control versus what you don't. And furthermore, for anything that you don't have control, you need to know it very, very well. And we'll get into some of that today. Okay, so congratulations. You've made it into the accelerator, and this is probably the hardest thing that you're going to do is decide to stop doing whatever you were doing before. You've probably heard this from the Alchemist team, right? It's a big deal. You're putting your life into this opportunity, right? Trying to be an entrepreneur, or being an entrepreneur and building this business. And now comes the next part, right? So I have some assumptions that I want to run through with everybody today because it really does set the context for the rest of the talk. So number one, everyone here is building an enterprise product, right? And you're in market with that right now, talking with some customers, and so forth. Number two, you've raised some money just by being here. That is true because you're part of this accelerator. And and this is really important, comes into play later. You're deciding to go down this path of venture back. And I don't know if everybody's kind of come to terms with that, but it sort of means that there are a bunch of things that are not in your control. And one of those is the fact that you are now being looked at as a growth company. And as a growth company, the expectation is that you can get to this $100 million mark. And so that will become important later. And finally, that you do have additional fundraising planned and hopefully some liquidity event, right? The so-called exit. All right. So we're going to talk about aligning product and go-to-market. But the first question I have for everybody is, do you have product market fit in this room? Raise your hand if you do. You feel like you do. Awesome. Great. Wow. That's like a third or maybe half. That's great. All right. Somebody that raised their hand, tell me about why do you think you have product market fit?
Renewals.
Renewals. Okay, great. Great. Awesome. Anybody else?
At least in the market of Latin America, which is our case, that we are having like continuous interest for new customers and people that are coming.
So interest, and when you say people are coming, what does that mean?
The people that are like registering on the site, getting like a demo, and paying for the product.
And paying for the product.
Yeah.
Great. Who else? Anybody else?
Referrals.
Referrals? Yeah, customers are referring. Great. Anybody else? Okay, yep.
We have inbound customers as well, like they're reaching out to us.
Inbound customers. Great.
And
Awesome. That's really great. Okay. So we talked about this. How do you know? We have a little bit of that. Anybody else want to add to what they think product market fit means? Or what you understand it to be?
People are willing to create budget to make room for your software or
Okay.
product.
Yeah, nice. Anything else?
That the value proposition that you have for that customer segment is 10 times better to whatever they have.
Yeah, the value prop
ROI,
is a big deal. Yeah, well, if they can turn that 10x into some sort of ROI, yeah, excellent. Okay, cool. So it's about growth, right? But it's more than about growth. It's about some of the things that we're talking about, which really are the pillars of growth: customers, paying, references, and so forth. And so I drew this graph, and I started thinking about like, what does growth look like over time? And bumpy, smooths out, starts to go like a hockey stick. And so part of what I would ask you is, if you broke this up into 3 areas, where do you think product market fit begins? Number 1?
2.
Yeah, number 1.
2? Anybody else?
I would say 3.
3?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
I think that's a skill.
Yeah.
You think
Maybe
everything
every
else
level,
is-
depending
Number
on
20.
every level, depending on the stage for it.
Every level. Okay.
It starts at 1 and ends at 3.
I think
Like,
it's-
you usually get to 3
Okay.
because you already have product market fit, but before
2?
it starts.
Okay.
2 makes sense.
Okay, if you're 3, raise your hand if you're 3. Why do you think it's 3?
When you have
Because
it.
that's where the growth is, right? I mean, after that you grow because you found the product market fit.
Okay, you found product market fit, you're off to the races. Awesome. Who else is at 3?
I
Anders?
kind of was, yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking about stuff that's reproducible.
Yep.
And it's difficult to see here where that spot is, right? Where
Yep.
you know. So
Purposely drawn that way,
Yeah.
but yes.
So I definitely know. And
Okay.
By stage 3, it's reproducible. The stuff that this company
Awesome.
is doing, right?
All right, well, who said number 1? Okay,
So-
why product market fit number 1?
And it begins there. It never ends, but it's beginning there.
Okay, all right. Anybody else?
Yeah, so the product market fit process starts when you start trying to have a fit with your product. So it starts there, but then when you actually have it, it will be at 3, and then this one
Awesome.
starts coming.
Okay, so I have an opinion on this, and you'll see different opinions, but I'll give you mine. And I think this first one, I call it problem solution fit. And the reason I have this opinion is you'll see how this all comes together later on in the presentation about why I have very, I would say, strict rules about what's going on. Because I think you have to, in order to get where you want to be, you kind of have to know where you want to be, right? And then back into, well, what are the baseline things I need? Well, first, you need this problem solution fit. You have to have a product that solves, and this is important, your target customer's problem. Right? We're going to dive a lot more into customers and problems, but I believe this first phase is a very windy path. You have an idea about what problem you're trying to solve. You have an idea of what might solve it. You have an idea of the target customer, but it might change. There is a lot of variance going on in this phase, right? Just a lot of uncertainty. Okay. All right. So if that's problem solution fit, where does product market fit happen here? Number two. Okay. Everybody says 2. Okay. It is 2, and I believe, again, this is important for me and to express it in terms of this entire talk. This is this middle phase. And who said 3 earlier? Okay. So I think product market fit in a consumer product does look like phase 3. Because often in a consumer product, you're really relying on 2 channels, and I'll get to this, but user-generated content or viral. And those 2, which are the predominant channels for growth, once you start tapping that, it just kind of takes off. And so they're almost the same. But in enterprise, it's very different. And folks over here were saying, references, referrals, right, inbound. This is where I put 10 to 20 customers. That's an arbitrary number. But I know it's more than 1 in 5, and I know it's less than 100. But it's somewhere in that range, and it really depends on the type of enterprise. It could be small and medium-sized business. It could be some sort of global, international company, right? So it depends on the market, but it's about you've got this confidence that these companies are actually referring to each other, right? They're references for each other, and that actually is really, really important. So product market fit in an enterprise sense, you've got a dozen-ish customers that are paying and they're referenceable. If they're renewing, that's even better. Okay? I would argue you're actually maybe on to this 3rd phase. Okay, so what happens? Is anybody in this phase where it sort of looks like this, where you feel like you've got this product market fit, you've got paying customers, but things aren't scaling? It's just not growing as fast as you want. Yeah. Anybody in that zone? Yeah? Is that it? Even the people that were in product market fit? Okay, so you guys are founders. Who's closing your deals in your company? Founders. Okay. Is every sale the same? No. Okay. Right. Deals are different. Do you know how many sales or pilots or whatever you're going to do per week, per month? Is it pretty predictable? Do you have a constant flow that you can predict quarter over quarter? Awesome. Okay. So you might be in this in-between stage. So if you're in this stage, what's the answer? What would you do? How would you invest time and money and resources to fix this problem?
Alchemist.
Go to Alchemist. How about this? Spend more money on marketing and sales? Who's doing that now to get that growth?
I think it's more about trying to understand, the repeatable model, and maybe doing trial and error, different channels, different tactics, and then when you find something that is is predictable, then is when you start investing.
I like that. I like that answer a lot. So, a lot of startups try to invest too early, right? They try to prematurely scale at this product market fit. They feel like, oh, we've got a couple paying customers. When I say a couple, 20, right? And they've written case studies for us. Let's go. Let's hire a sales team. Let's hire a VP of sales. Let's start, up spending on marketing. And unfortunately, there's a big problem in the industry. This is Steve Blank. You guys know Steve Blank, Stanford professor. It's the leading cause of death. You start overspending too early, and 74% fail, and 93% that scale prematurely wind up never breaking the 100K mark. You just don't ever break orbit. So what's the big idea here, right? So if it's not the spending just going crazy on the marketing and sales, what do we do? So I think that growth is a lot more than product market fit. In fact, I would say that flat curve I showed you, that's probably 90% of startups. And the issue is that organizations often focus at this level. They focus on problem solution, product market. And it takes more than that. You've got to align your product with your go-to-market. And especially in SaaS, in enterprise SaaS, it's even more important. I'll get to that. So this third phase, I call it go-to-market fit. Others are calling it go-to-market fit now too. And I don't know your name. What was your name?
Sergio.
Sergio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we met before, so I apologize if I forgot your name. But you were talking about repeatable, right? That's what's happening here. But it's more than that. It is about the ability to repeatedly find and win new customers in a predictable way, in a scalable way. That takes a lot more than just adding a sales team or adding more dollars to Facebook ads or Google ads. By the way, side note, 40 cents of every single venture dollar is paid, the 40 cents is shared by Amazon, Google, and Facebook. So every dollar you raise, startups just pay that money for web services, for ads. So be thinking about that. That's the real business over there. Conversely, the other side of this coin is that for companies that do scale at the right time, they scale 20 times faster. So in this way, this is how I've thought about things for a while. Your product literally defines your go-to-market. Like how you're going to sell your product through what channels and so forth. And the reverse is true. Your go-to-market defines your product. And the growth only happens when these two things are in alignment. So now the question is, how do you do that?
Could you give an example for this?
I am going to give you many examples.
Fair enough.
So, the early slide, I've built a couple of startups and they were fine, no big outcomes from there. Built several great businesses within large companies that I've worked in. In particular, I worked on 14 acquisitions when I worked at VMware, and part of doing all that work, I had to think about these products, how are we putting them into the market, how are we going to distribute them, how do we think about market segmentation, how do we think about pricing and packaging, and I had to put all these ideas in my mind into some framework that I could express to the greater organization. And so I built this model here, right, where customers and product, that's your pain, that's your problem solution fit. You've got a sales model, you're using pricing and packaging to determine how you're going to sell. Your customer has segments, use your channels to get to the customer at the right segment. So it was a neat model, but it was also just ugly, and I didn't like it a lot. And so I was talking with the managing director of a small VC fund, Social Starts, and he was asking me to come out and talk about this stuff to his portfolio in New York. And I was telling him about this and decided to have me go out there, and I started doing some research. And I ran into this guy that created a much more elegant framework. And his name is Brian Balfour. I encourage you guys to go look him up. And he has this idea of these 4 fits. And if you notice, the things that are here are the same as the ones that were on the previous. It's just a lot tighter and a lot nicer to look at. And the key thing around here is that in this model, you need to focus on the things that you can control. And you only have control over your own product and the sales model you use. You can choose those 2 things. Everything else is utterly out of your control. And so you need to fit the things that you control, the product and the market, or excuse me, the product and the sales model, to the things that you don't. So what we're going to do today is we're going to roll through this entire framework. We're going to look at, first, fitting your product to the market, then fitting your product to the channel, then your sales model to the market, and then your sales model to the channel. I know it sounds complex, but we're recording it so you can go take notes now and review later. Okay, first, let's do market product fit, but actually, time out. Who questions at this point so far? Is this resonating? Do you want more or less?
More.
Want more? Okay. Feel like I'm going to unlock some secrets for you? Hopefully. Okay, market product fit. So in this case, you want to start with the market and then fit your product to it. That's why when you're an accelerator or anybody tells you, focus on your customer, right? And there's a tool that I love using. This is, I don't know if you've seen this before, but Strategizer. I share this with a lot of teams, shared it with past Alchemist teams and past batches. It's really good. What's important though is that, and I think this is where a lot of the companies kind of really don't get to the level they need to, which is it's not enough to look at the market or the customer. You need to be thinking about the customer in terms of the jobs they do. You literally need to follow your customer around during the day. What time do they wake up? Do they wake up to an alarm or an iPhone or an Android? Do they, every single thing that they do. What do they eat for breakfast? What time do they eat? When they go to work, how do they get to work? Like you want to know, I mean, I'm being a little facetious here, but that's the level of investigative journalism that you need to have so that you understand every single function that that person, that target user, does every single day. And it's only after understanding that you can then start to ask them, talk to me about the pains and otherwise known as gains, like what are the aspirations they have for their job? How can it be easier? What is it that makes them want to pull their hair out of their head? What gives them a headache? What makes them want to quit? You want to get to these incredibly, incredibly significant pains and very high aspirational gains. And when you do this, one of the things I talk to young companies about is thinking about what is your minimum viable customer segment? What's the smallest, most focused customer that you can go after where there's still a market? And I think, Sergio, you asked about it too, or maybe someone else did, about there's a budget. Ryan, maybe that's what you were saying. There's a budget, right? Knowing what budget is going to be used for your product is essential. You cannot be an enterprise company if you don't know. And if you're creating a new category and you can say, oh, budget doesn't exist yet, that's actually harder. That is not a badge of honor, although it has its benefits later, right? It has its benefits later. So in this, the final one here, which should be really at the top, is does the customer care? Is this a significant enough pain or problem that they actually want to solve it? And that any of the existing incumbent alternatives are not as good, or work well enough that it just doesn't matter, right? It's just not urgent. That's probably the word to remember here, urgency. Is there urgency? So I want to read this together. I think this is so important. This is Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School. So it's not just the jobs, but you have to think of every job that that customer does in 3 dimensions. The functional job, what do they do? And then the social and emotional dimensions. What impact does it have on how they feel about work, or how they feel about their job, or their coworkers? What impact does it have in terms of the way they are recognized within the company? Does it help them move to the next level? Does it help them in a promotion or in their career development? These are all critical things to understand. And then beyond that, you need to understand the best way for them to purchase and use your product. It's beyond just the functional, just the what. And when you do those things, you're able to actually create